In the glittering world of old money and corporate dynasties, one woman's fairy tale turned into a nightmare. Isabella. 7 months pregnant and deeply in love with her billionaire husband, Margot Croft, suddenly found herself a widow. But her grief was just the beginning. At the reading of his will, Margot's entire $10 billion fortune, the sprawling estates, the private jets, all of it was left to his stunning mistress, a woman named Sophia. Isabella was left with nothing but the baby in her womb and a heart shattered into a million pieces. Until a single, unexpected phone call from a mysterious lawyer changed everything. The scent of salt and roses always reminded Isabella of Margot. It was the fragrance of their cliffside estate in Carmel by the sea. A sprawling masterpiece of glass and redwood that seemed to float between the azure sky and the churning Pacific below. This morning, however, the scent was laced with something acrid. The metallic tang of unspoken anxiety. At 28, Isabella was 7 months into a pregnancy that should have been the triumphant culmination of her love story with Margot Croft, the enigmatic billionaire whose empire, Croft Holdings, spanned from renewable energy to cutting-edge pharmaceuticals. She traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, her gaze drifting over the manicured lawns that rolled down to the cliff's edge. Margot, 52, was a force of nature. A man whose charisma was as legendary as his business acumen. He had swept into her life in a whirlwind of private jets, Michelin-starred dinners, and impromptu trips to see the northern lights from a luxury igloo in Finland. Isabella, then a budding art historian, had been utterly captivated. He wasn't just wealthy. He was brilliant. With a mind that moved at the speed of light and a rare ability to make her feel like she was the only person in the universe. Their wedding had been the stuff of legends. A lavish affair at the Villa d'Este on Lake Como, attended by tech moguls, European royalty, and Hollywood A-listers. For 2 years, their life had been a seamless dream. Margot adored her, showering her with affection and encouraging her passion for Renaissance art. He had funded a private gallery for her in San Francisco and filled their homes, the Carmel estate, a penthouse on Park Avenue, a villa in St. Bart's with priceless works she had curated. But the dream had begun to fray at the edges 6 months ago. It started with whispers, fragments of conversations overheard by staff, mentions of a name, Sophia Rossi, a Brazilian model whose face graced the covers of Vogue and whose sultry walk had dominated the runways of Paris and Milan. Isabella had initially dismissed the rumors as the inevitable gossip that clung to men of Margot's stature. He was a handsome, powerful man. Of course, women would throw themselves at him. He had assured her, with a hand over his heart and that devastatingly sincere look in his steel-gray eyes, that she was his everything, his anchor, his future. The assurances, however, became less frequent as his business trips grew longer, his explanations vaguer. The vibrant energy that had once defined him was replaced by a distracted, almost haunted weariness. He'd spend hours locked in his study, the low murmur of his voice on the phone a constant, unsettling presence. When she tried to broach the subject, he would deflect, his charm a silken shield she couldn't penetrate. "Darling, you mustn't stress," he'd say, his hand gently stroking her burgeoning belly. "It's not good for our son. These are just complex negotiations. A hostile takeover attempt. You wouldn't want me to bore you with the details." But Isabella wasn't bored. She was terrified. The late-night calls. The scent of an unfamiliar jasmine-based perfume on a suit jacket he'd carelessly tossed aside. The sudden chill in his demeanor when she got too closey it all pointed to a truth she wasn't ready to face. The golden cage, once a symbol of their perfect life, had begun to feel like a prison. The final, brutal confirmation came not from a whisper, but from the glossy pages of a tabloid she saw at a salon, a grainy paparazzi photo taken on a sun-drenched beach in Rio de Janeiro. Margot, laughing. His arm wrapped possessively around Sophia Rossi. The model was looking up at him with an expression of such intimate adoration that it felt like a physical blow. The caption was merciless: "Billionaire Margot Croft finds paradise with supermodel Sophia Rossi." Is his fairy tale marriage over? That night, she confronted him. The confrontation wasn't a screaming match. It was a quiet, desolate affair conducted in the hushed opulence of their bedroom. The waves crashing below, a somber soundtrack to her heartbreak. Margot didn't deny it. He looked resigned. "Isabella. It's not what you think," he began, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "Isn't it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You love her." It wasn't a question. He sank onto the edge of their vast, custom-made bed. His shoulders slumped. "It's complicated." Complicated? The word was a bitter pill. "I am carrying your child, Margot. We built a life together. You made vows to me. What part of that is complicated?" "Sophia. She understands a part of my world you don't. The pressures. The ruthlessness. It's a different kind of connection." He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was looking at the Aubusson carpet, at the intricate patterns of wool and silk, as if the answers were woven into the threads. The cruelty of his words stole her breath. He was invalidating their entire relationship, dismissing her as a beautiful, naive creature who couldn't possibly comprehend the stratosphere in which he operated. The gallery he'd funded, the art he'd praised her for finding, was it all just a patronizing gesture? A way to keep his pretty wife occupied while he sought companionship with someone he considered his equal? The argument ended in a stalemate of tears and silence. Isabella retreated into herself, the joy of her pregnancy curdling into a knot of fear. What would happen to her? To her baby? She was financially dependent on Margot. Her own career a distant memory. He was her world. And that world was crumbling. A week later, Margot left for a business trip to Tokyo. He kissed her forehead, his touch clinical, his eyes distant. "We'll sort this out when I get back, Izzy," he promised. "I promise." He never came back. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Margot Croft's private jet, a state-of-the-art Gulfstream G650, had gone down in the Sea of Japan during a sudden, violent storm. There were no survivors. The world reeled. Tributes poured in from presidents and prime ministers. The stock market shuddered. Croft Holdings shares plummeted. For Isabella, the world simply ceased to exist. The shock was so profound. It was physical. A crushing weight that buckled her knees and stole the air from her lungs. The man she loved. The man who had betrayed her. The father of her unborn child. Was gone. The complex tangle of her emotions, love, rage, grief, terror, was a storm inside her. mirroring the one that had claimed his life. In the days that followed, she moved in a fog of sedatives and sorrow. Margot's formidable team of executives and lawyers descended upon the Carmel estate. Their faces grim. Their voices hushed. They spoke of business continuity, of market stabilization, of funeral arrangements. Isabella could barely process the words. She was the grieving widow. A tragic, beautiful figurehead. She nodded when she was supposed to nod. Signed what she was told to sign. Through the haze, she was aware of another presence. A phantom haunting the periphery of her grief. Sophia Rossi had flown in from Paris. Her stunning face veiled in black. Her sorrow broadcast across every news channel. She didn't dare come to the estate. But her image was everywhere. The glamorous, heartbroken mistress. The narrative was already being written, the passionate, tempestuous love affair. Tragically cut short. Isabella, the quiet, dignified wife, was becoming a footnote in her own husband's story. The day of the will reading was a week after the funeral. A bleak, overcast sky hung over Carmel. The sea a sheet of slate gray. The air in the grand library of the estate was thick with tension. Isabella sat in a high-backed leather chair, her hands resting protectively on her stomach. Her mother, a practical, no-nonsense woman from Boston, sat beside her, her hand a comforting weight on Isabella's shoulder. Across the polished mahogany table sat Margot's family, his stern, disapproving sister, Catherine, and her two grasping sons. At the head of the table, flanked by two lawyers whose faces were masks of professional neutrality, was Margot's longtime attorney and confidant, Marcus Thorne. Thorne, a relic from a bygone era, possessed a mane of silver hair, a bespoke suit, and an air of unshakable authority. But as Marcus cleared his throat, another figure slipped into the room. Silent as a shadow, Sophia Rossi. She was breathtaking even in her grief. A simple, exquisitely cut black dress. A single strand of pearls, a gift from Margot. No doubt in eyes that, even when red-rimmed, held a defiant fire. She took a seat at the far end of the table, her posture radiating a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Catherine shot her a look of pure venom. Isabella just felt a profound, soul-crushing weariness. Marcus Thorne looked up, his gaze sweeping over the room before landing with a flicker of what looked like pity on Isabella. "We are gathered here today to execute the last will and testament of Margot Alexander Croft," he began, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "This will was signed and notarized 3 months ago, superseding all previous versions. 3 months ago." The words hit Isabella with the force of a physical blow. That was right after the tabloid photo. Right after their devastating confrontation. This was a will written in the heat of their conflict. In the thrall of his affair. A cold dread seeped into her bones. Thorne unfolded the document with a crisp rustle of paper. He read through the initial bequests, a generous trust for his sister. Smaller yet substantial sums for his nephews. Donations to his preferred charities, the boilerplate of a billionaire's philanthropy. Then he paused, took a sip of water, and looked directly at Isabella. "To my wife, Isabella Maria Croft," he read, his voice devoid of emotion. "I leave my sincerest apologies for my failings as a husband. I wish her and our child a healthy and happy life. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence. Isabella's mind struggled to catch up. Apologies? That was it? Her mother's hand tightened on her shoulder. Catherine's sons exchanged a bewildered glance. Thorne continued. His voice steady. The remainder of my estate. Including all shares in Croft Holdings. All real estate properties. Both domestic and international. All art collections. Vehicles. And all liquid assets. I bequeath to Ms. Sophia Elena Rossi. The room erupted. Catherine shot to her feet. Her face purple with rage. This is an outrage. A travesty. That woman manipulated him. He wasn't in his right mind. Her sons joined the chorus, shouting about undue influence and legal challenges. But their voices faded into a dull roar in Isabella's ears. All she could hear was the blood pounding in her head. Nothing. He had left her nothing. Not the Carmel estate she had made a home. Not the Park Avenue penthouse where they had spent their first year of marriage. Not even a token amount to provide for his own son. He had erased her. Disinherited her. Left her pregnant and destitute with nothing but a hollow apology. Through the chaos, she looked at Sophia. The model's face was a mask of curated sorrow. But for a fleeting second, her eyes met Isabella's across the table. And in their dark depths, Isabella saw not grief, but triumph. A cold, calculating, victorious gleam. Isabella stood up. Her legs unsteady. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. The grief she had felt for Margot's death was now eclipsed by the sheer, devastating force of his final betrayal. With her mother's help, she turned and walked out of the library. Away from the shouting. Away from the pitying eyes of the staff. Away from the woman who had stolen her husband and now her entire world. As she stepped out onto the terrace, the cold, salty air hit her face. She looked out at the churning gray ocean. The endless expanse of water that had taken Margot from her. He hadn't just died. He had annihilated her. He had left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the child in her womb. A final, brutal testament to how little she had ever truly meant to him. The golden cage had been shattered. And she was in a free fall with no safety net in sight. The days that followed the will reading bled into one another in a monochrome blur of misery. The vibrant colors of the Carmel estate seemed to mock Isabella with their cheerful brilliance. Like the buttery yellow of the guest room she was now confined to. Sophia, with chilling efficiency, had already begun the process of claiming her inheritance. Her lawyer's polite but firm notices felt like a constant, nauseating reminder of her fall from grace. She was no longer Mrs. Margot Croft, Lady of the Manor. She was an inconvenient, pregnant houseguest with a 10-day deadline to vacate the premises. The staff who had once catered to her every whim with genuine affection now averted their eyes. Their faces a mixture of pity and awkwardness. They were employed by the estate. And the estate now belonged to Sophia. Their loyalties, like everything else, had been transferred. Her mother, Helen, was her rock. A bastion of fierce maternal practicality in the swirling chaos. "We'll fight this, Izzy," she insisted. Her voice a low, angry hum. "This is insane. No judge in their right mind would uphold a will that leaves a pregnant wife with nothing. We'll get the best lawyers in California. We'll prove he was coerced. But Isabella had no fight left in her. The betrayal had hollowed her out, leaving an abyss where her love and trust had once been. It wasn't just about the money. It was the public humiliation. The deliberate, cruel erasure of her existence from Margot's life. He had wanted the world to know that Sophia was his chosen one, his true partner. And Isabella was nothing more than a footnote. A mistake he was apologizing for. Her nights were sleepless, filled with the ghosts of her marriage. Every corner of the house held a memory, Margot teaching her to dance in the grand ballroom, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The two of them curled up by the massive stone fireplace in the library, reading to each other on rainy afternoons. The tender way he had touched her stomach the first time he felt their baby kick. Had it all been a lie? A performance by a master manipulator? She'd spend hours staring at her reflection, at the swell of her belly. And a chilling thought would take root: was this baby the only reason he'd even stayed with her as long as he had? Was she just an incubator for the Croft heir? A vessel he'd intended to discard once his legacy was secure? The thought made her physically ill. The media frenzy was relentless. The billionaire's bombshell will, screamed the headlines. Jilted wife left penniless. Paparazzi camped outside the gates of the estate, their long-lensed cameras like vultures waiting for a carcass. Isabella became a prisoner in her own home, afraid to even step out onto the terrace for a breath of fresh air. They printed old photos of her and Margot juxtaposed with recent, glamorous shots of Sophia, now being hailed as the Cinderella heiress. Sophia, for her part, played the role of the grieving, reluctant beneficiary to perfection. She gave a single, tearful interview to a fawning journalist from Vanity Fair. "This isn't about the money," she'd said, her voice husky with emotion. A single perfect tear tracing a path down her flawless cheek. "This is about honoring Margot's final wishes." He was a complex man, a tortured genius. He felt misunderstood. "I was the only one who truly saw him. The inheritance is a burden, but it's one I will carry to protect his legacy." Protect his legacy. Helen had spat, throwing the magazine across the room. That lying, gold-digging viper is his legacy. Isabella's own resources were terrifyingly slim. She had a personal bank account, but the balance was meager. Margot had always insisted on handling everything. All their assets were in his name, tied up in complex trusts and holding companies. The beautiful clothes, the jewelry, the art in her San Francisco gallery. She soon learned via a coldly formal letter from Sophia's legal team that these were all considered assets of the estate. She was entitled to her personal effects, but anything of significant value was now the property of Sophia Rossi. They were even demanding the return of the sapphire engagement ring Margot had given her, a priceless heirloom of the Croft family. One afternoon, packing her belongings into boxes with the help of her mother, she came across a small, leather-bound book. It was a first edition of the sonnets of Pablo Neruda, a gift from Margot on their first anniversary. Inside, he had inscribed, "For my Izzy, who taught me the poetry of life. Forever yours, M." The sight of his familiar, bold handwriting sent a fresh wave of grief and rage through her. Forever yours. The words were a cruel joke. She almost threw the book into the fireplace. But something stopped her. She couldn't let go. Not yet. The love had been real. She had to believe that. The betrayal didn't erase the moments of genuine happiness. Did it? Or was she just clinging to a fantasy? The deadline to leave was 2 days away when Helen's lawyer called. He was a seasoned, expensive litigator from a top San Francisco firm. His assessment was blunt and discouraging. Contesting the will is going to be an uphill battle. Isabella, he said, his voice grim over the phone. A very, very steep one. Margot Croft was one of the most brilliant legal and financial minds of his generation. This will is ironclad. It was witnessed by 4 independent parties. He underwent a full psychological evaluation the day before signing. And there's a notarized video recording of him stating his intentions clearly. A video? Isabella whispered, her blood turning to ice. Yes. He states that he is of sound mind and body and that while he wishes you no ill will, he believes his assets are best managed by Ms. Rossi, whom he describes as his business and life partner. His business and life partner. The phrase was a dagger to the heart. It was a calculated, posthumous execution of her reputation and their marriage. Margot had not just left her. He had systematically dismantled their history piece by piece, ensuring that Sophia would be seen not as the mistress but as his rightful successor. So there's nothing? Helen demanded, grabbing the phone from Isabella's limp hand. You're telling us there's no recourse? My daughter is pregnant with his child. The law in California provides for an omitted spouse or omitted child under certain circumstances. The lawyer explained patiently. But Margot's will specifically and intentionally disinherits Isabella. It mentions her, which makes the omitted spouse argument nearly impossible. As for the child, since the will was written before the child's birth, we might have a stronger claim there. The court will almost certainly grant some provision for child support from the estate. But it will be a fight. Sophia Rossi's lawyers will argue that Margot's apology and best wishes were all he intended. They'll drag it out for years. It will be expensive, public, and incredibly painful for your daughter. Years. A long, drawn-out battle against a woman with limitless resources. All while trying to raise a newborn baby on her own. The prospect was exhausting. Impossible. After the call, Isabella walked out to the cliffs, pulling her cashmere shawl tightly around her. The wind was picking up, whipping her hair around her face. The sea below was a turbulent gray, crashing against the rocks with a relentless, percussive roar. It mirrored the turmoil in her soul. She was standing on the edge of a precipice. Not just literally, but metaphorically. Behind her was the ruin of her past. Before her, a terrifying, unknown future. For a wild, desperate moment, she understood the dark allure of the churning water. The temptation to let go. To simply step off the edge and let the ocean swallow her and her pain. The thought was so powerful it made her dizzy. But then, a tiny, fluttering movement inside her. A kick. Her son. Her hands flew to her belly, cupping it, protecting it. This wasn't just her life anymore. This was his. He was all she had left of Margot. The only good, pure thing to come out of the wreckage of their love. He was an innocent, a tiny, blameless soul who deserved a chance. Who deserved a mother who would fight for him. The despair didn't vanish. But it receded. Pushed back by a surge of primal maternal resolve. She wouldn't give Sophia Rossi the satisfaction of her destruction. She wouldn't let Margot's final, cruel act be the end of her story. She would survive for her son. She didn't know how. But she would find a way. She turned her back on the cliff edge and walked back towards the house. Her steps more certain than they had been in weeks. She would leave this place. This monument to her broken dreams. She would pack her boxes. Take her mother's hand. And walk away with her head held high. She had nothing but her dignity and the life growing inside her. But in that moment, it felt like enough. The last day at the estate was surreal. Sophia's people. A team of briskly efficient men and women in dark suits. Were already there taking inventory. Their clipboards and tablets a clinical counterpoint to Isabella's raw emotion. They moved through the rooms with a proprietary air that made Isabella's skin crawl. She packed the last of her things into the back of her mother's sensible sedan, a few boxes of clothes, books, and personal mementos. It was a pitifully small collection to show for 2 years of marriage to a billionaire. As she was about to get into the car, a sleek black town car pulled up the long gravel driveway. Sophia stepped out. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit. Looking less like a grieving mistress and more like a CEO ready to take over a company which Isabella supposed she was. Isabella, Sophia said. Her voice smooth as silk. I'm glad I caught you. What do you want? Sophia? Isabella asked. Her voice flat. She refused to give this woman the drama she so clearly craved. I wanted to offer my sympathies, Sophia said. Her expression a perfect facsimile of sincerity. And to give you this. She held out a check. Isabella glanced at it. It was for $50. 000. What is this? A gesture, Sophia said. A magnanimous smile playing on her lips. To help you get back on your feet. Margot wouldn't have wanted you to be destitute. The condescension. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was breathtaking. It was a final twist of the knife. An attempt to reframe Margot's cruelty as a tragic oversight that she, the benevolent heiress, was now correcting. Isabella felt a surge of white-hot fury. A strength she didn't know she possessed. She looked from the check to Sophia's perfectly made-up face. And then she did something she never thought she would do. She laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a raw, bitter, defiant laugh that echoed in the quiet, foggy air. A gesture, she said, her voice dripping with scorn. You steal my husband. You steal my home. You steal my entire life. And you offer me crumbs from the table you've usurped? You can keep your gesture. She turned her back on the stunned model, got into the car, and didn't look back as her mother drove down the long driveway. Away from the cliffside palace and the life she had lost. As they passed through the imposing iron gates for the last time, her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize with a New York area code. Annoyed, thinking it was another reporter who'd somehow gotten her number, she almost ignored it. But on a whim, she answered. Her voice sharp. Hello. Is this Mrs. Isabella Croft? A man's voice asked. It was a calm, steady voice with an undercurrent of authority. Who is this? My name is Benjamin Carter. The man said. I am an attorney. I was Margot Croft's personal lawyer. Isabella frowned. I've never heard of you. Margot's lawyer was Marcus Thorne. Mr. Thorne was his corporate counsel. The voice clarified. He handled the business of Croft Holdings. I handled Mr. Croft's private affairs. He instructed me to contact you at this specific date and time. I have something for you. Something he wanted you to have. I believe it would be in your best interest if we could meet as soon as possible. A new feeling. One she hadn't felt in a long time. Flickered in the abyss of her despair. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was a tiny, fragile spark of curiosity. A personal lawyer she'd never heard of. Instructions to call her at this exact moment. What private affairs could Margot have had that Marcus Thorne, his confidant of 30 years, wasn't aware of? Where are you? She asked. Her heart beginning to beat just a little bit faster. I'm in San Francisco. Benjamin Carter replied. I have an office on Montgomery Street. Can you be here tomorrow morning at 10? Isabella looked at her mother, who was watching her with a bewildered expression. She looked at the road ahead, leaving the fog of Carmel behind for the sunnier skies of the Bay Area. She had no idea what this was or what it meant. It could be another dead end. Another cruel twist in this nightmare. But it was also the first thing that wasn't about loss. About what had been taken from her. It was something new. A mystery. Yes. She said. Her voice firmer now. I'll be there. The law offices of Benjamin Carter were nothing like the opulent, mahogany-paneled fortress of Marcus Thorne. They occupied a modest suite on the 24th floor of a sleek, modern skyscraper in the heart of San Francisco's financial district. The reception area was minimalist and discreet, with gray flannel walls, abstract art, and a single orchid on a glass table. It spoke not of old money power, but of quiet, contemporary efficiency. Isabella, feeling conspicuous in her simple maternity dress, gave her name to the receptionist. She hadn't slept, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Was this a trap? Some new legal maneuver by Sophia? Or was it what it claimed to be a final message from her husband, delivered from beyond the grave? A moment later, a man emerged from an inner office. He was younger than she expected. Perhaps in his late 30s. With sharp, intelligent eyes, a neatly trimmed beard, and an air of calm competence. He wore a well-tailored but unassuming suit. This was Benjamin Carter. Mrs. Croft, he said, extending a hand. His handshake was firm and reassuring. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, come in. He led her into a corner office with a panoramic view of the San Francisco Bay. Unlike the room, the view was breathtaking. He gestured for her to take a seat in one of the comfortable leather chairs opposite his desk. Can I get you some water? Tea? He asked. Water would be lovely. Thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He poured her a glass from a pitcher on his credenza and sat down, folding his hands on the polished surface of his desk. He didn't begin with legal jargon or platitudes. He simply looked at her with an expression of deep, unfeigned sympathy. First, he said, His voice gentle. Let me say that I am truly sorry for your loss and for the ordeal you have been put through. I can only imagine how difficult these past weeks have been. The genuine compassion in his voice. So different from the pity or condescension she had grown used to. Almost broke her. She simply nodded. Trusting that if she tried to speak, she would start crying. I will be as direct as possible. He continued. As I know your time is precious. As I mentioned, I was Margot's private attorney. I handled matters that he wished to keep separate from his corporate identity and, I must add, separate from the influence of Marcus Thorne and his firm. Why? Isabella asked, finding her voice. I thought Marcus was his most trusted advisor. Carter leaned forward slightly. Marcus Thorne is a brilliant corporate lawyer. His loyalty, first and foremost, is to the stability and profitability of Croft Holdings. That loyalty, at times, did not perfectly align with Margot's personal wishes or what he considered to be his moral obligations. Margot was a very complex man. Mrs. Croft. He was playing a very long, very dangerous game. The phrase, dangerous game, sent a chill down her spine. What game? Before I can explain, I need to have you sign a non-disclosure agreement, Carter said, sliding a document across the desk. What I am about to tell you is of the utmost sensitivity. It involves criminal activity at the highest levels of the financial world. And if this information were to become public prematurely, it could not only derail everything Margot put in place, but it could also put you and your child in very real danger. Danger. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was spiraling into something far beyond a simple inheritance dispute. Her hand trembled as she took the pen and signed the document. Carter took the NDA, placed it in a folder, and then looked at her. His expression serious. For the past 18 months, Margot was aware of a massive fraud being perpetrated from within his own companion's sophisticated scheme of money laundering, insider trading, and embezzlement. It was being run by a small, tight-knit cabal of his most senior executives. And at the center of it, he paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in, were his sister, Catherine, and his corporate counsel, Marcus Thorne. Isabella stared at him, dumbfounded. Catherine. She had always been cold and greedy, but a criminal mastermind. And Marcus Thorne, the loyal, old-world attorney who had been like a second father to Margot. It seemed impossible. They were siphoning hundreds of millions of dollars from the company, funneling it through a network of shell corporations and offshore accounts. Carter explained. They were using the company's resources to manipulate markets and extort competitors. They were untouchable, protected by layers of legal and financial firewalls. Margot found out by accident, through a data anomaly his personal security team flagged. When he started digging, he realized the rot went to the very core of his organization. But why didn't he just go to the authorities? Fire them? Isabella asked, her mind struggling to process the information. Because it wasn't that simple, Carter said. Thorne had entangled the company's legitimate operations with the fraudulent ones so masterfully that exposing them without destroying Croft Holdings entirely was nearly impossible. The company's stock would collapse. Tens of thousands of employees would lose their jobs. And the entire edifice Margot had spent his life building would crumble into dust. Furthermore, they had leverage over him. They had manufactured evidence that implicated Margot himself in the initial stages of the scheme. If he went to the SEC or the FBI, they would take him down with them. Isabella felt a wave of nausea. She remembered the change in Margot. The haunted, weary look in his eyes. It wasn't just the affair. He had been carrying this monumental burden, fighting a war in secret. So what did he do? She whispered. He decided to fight them on his own terms. He hired me and a small, elite team of forensic accountants and cybersecurity experts. Completely off the books. For the last year and a half, we have been working in the shadows, gathering the evidence needed to surgically remove this cancer without killing the patient. It was a painstaking, incredibly dangerous process. We were essentially building a secret, parallel company infrastructure to untangle the legitimate from the criminal. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. And that, Mrs. Croft, is where Sophia Rossi comes in. The name landed like a stone in the quiet room. Sophia. Sophia Rossi was not Margot's mistress, Carter said. The words clear and deliberate. Isabella felt the world tilt on its axis. What? What are you talking about? I saw the pictures. He admitted it. He admitted to a complicated relationship. Did he not? He let you believe it was an affair because the truth was infinitely more dangerous for you. Sophia Rossi is not a model. That is a cover. Her real name is Elena Vargas. And she is one of the world's foremost undercover operatives, specializing in corporate espionage and infiltration. She formerly worked for Mossad and now operates as a private contractor for a very select clientele. We hired her to get close to the inner circle of the conspiracy. Isabella's mouth was dry. She took a sip of water, her mind reeling. The sultry model, the passionate affair, it was all a fabrication. A mission. Catherine and Marcus were misogynistic. Carter continued. They saw women as decorations, playthings for powerful men. They never suspected that Margot's beautiful, vapid new mistress was actually a brilliant operative with a genius-level IQ and a black belt in Krav Maga. While they were preening and boasting, trying to impress her, she was planting listening devices, copying hard drives, and mapping out their entire money laundering network. The trip to Rio, the tabloid photosit, was all staged. It was a necessary part of the theater to make the affair look convincing, to give Sophia the credibility she needed to get close to them. The pieces began to fall into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and, in a strange way, clarifying. Margot's distraction, his secrecy, his talk of a different kind of connection with Sophia had all been part of the mission. He wasn't dismissing Isabella. He was protecting her. By pushing her away, by letting her believe the worst of him, he was keeping her out of the line of fire. If Catherine and Thorne had ever suspected that Isabella knew what was happening, she would have become a target, a pawn to be used against him. And the will? She asked, her voice trembling. Why would he write that horrible will? This was the question that had tormented her. The wound that refused to close. The will, Carter said, his expression softening, was the final, most brilliant, and most painful move in the entire game. It was the masterstroke. He stood up and walked to a large, framed abstract painting on the wall. He pressed a corner of the frame. and a section of the wall slid back silently, revealing a secure safe. He entered a code, and the heavy steel door swung open. From it, he retrieved a thick, leather-bound portfolio. He placed it on the desk in front of Isabella. Margot knew he was in danger. Carter said quietly. The people he was fighting were ruthless. He had received credible threats. He had to consider the possibility that he wouldn't survive to see this through. So he created a failsafe. He had to make a choice, in the event of his death. What was more important? His personal reputation, or ensuring that the criminals were brought to justice and his true legacy the clean company? And you were protected? He opened the portfolio. Inside were more legal documents, intricately detailed financial statements, and a single sealed envelope with her name, Isabella, written in Margot's hand. The public will, Carter explained. The one Marcus Thorne read was a piece of theater. It was designed to do three things. First, to lull the conspirators into a false sense of security. With Margot gone and their chosen puppet, Sophia, in control of the estate, they would believe they had one. They would become complacent, less careful. Second, it was to give Sophia, or rather, Elena, the legal standing and the resources of the estate to complete the final phase of the operation. And third, he paused, his gaze full of meaning. It was to make you, in the eyes of the world and in the eyes of his enemies, a penniless, powerless, and therefore completely irrelevant victim. The safest thing you could possibly be. Isabella's hands flew to her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. He hadn't betrayed her. He had saved her. The public humiliation, the disinheritance, the apology, it was all a shield. A painful, brutal, but ultimately loving act of protection. The day of his flight to Tokyo, Carter said. He knew the risk was exceptionally high. The final pieces of our investigation were falling into place. And the other side was getting nervous. Before he left, he executed this. He tapped the portfolio. This is the true will and testament of Margot Croft. It was created with a legal mechanism known as a pour-over will in conjunction with a revocable living trust, of which you are the sole trustee and beneficiary. This document, which supersedes the other one upon the fulfillment of certain conditions, leaves everything to you. He slid another document out. It was a signed, notarized confession from a Shell Corporation director in the Cayman Islands, detailing his dealings with Marcus Thorne. What conditions? She asked, her voice thick with unshed tears. The condition, Carter said, a grim smile touching his lips, was the delivery of irrefutable evidence of Marcus Thorne's criminal activities to the office of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Evidence that would lead to his arrest and conviction. Elena Vargas Sofia delivered that evidence this morning. As we speak, warrants are being executed. Marcus Thorne, Catherine Croft, and 12 other senior executives of Croft Holdings are being taken into federal custody. The room was silent for a long moment, save for the distant hum of the city. It was over. The game Margot had been playing was won. Tears were now streaming freely down Isabella's face, tears of grief for the husband she had misunderstood. Tears of relief from a burden she hadn't even known she was carrying. And tears of profound Heart-wrenching love for the man who had orchestrated this entire elaborate, painful symphony to protect her and their child. He wanted you to have this, Carter said softly, pushing the sealed envelope towards her. With trembling hands, Isabella broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored stationery, filled with Margot's familiar, bold script. My dearest Izzy, it began. If you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. And I have failed in my most important duty, to come home to you. For that, I am more sorry than words can ever say. I know that my actions these past months have caused you unimaginable pain. I have forced you to believe I betrayed you, that I stopped loving you. Nothing could be further from the truth. Loving you and knowing you were carrying our son was the only light in a very dark world. Every decision I made, every painful deception, was to build a wall around you, to keep you safe from the poison that had infected our lives. It was the only way I knew how to fight this battle without making you a casualty. I have entrusted everything to you. My love. Not the money or the company, but my legacy. The company is now clean. The wolves have been caged. Build it. Change it. Sell it, do with it as you see fit. Create a world for our son that is worthy of him. Worthy of you. Use these resources to pursue your passions. To fill the world with the art and beauty that you showed me. Forgive me for the pain I caused. It was the cruelest and most necessary act of my life. Know that in my final moments, my only thought was of you and of holding our son in my arms. You were never my weakness, Isabella. You were my reason. Forever yours, Margot. Isabella clutched the letter to her chest, her whole body shaking with convulsive sobs. The apology in the will had been a lie, a public facade. This was the truth. This was the real Margot. He hadn't abandoned her. He had loved her fiercely, protectively, until the very end. The abyss of despair she had been living in was suddenly flooded with light. The cage had not been shattered. It had been unlocked from the inside by the man who had built it to protect her all along. The inheritance wasn't the billions of dollars or the sprawling estates. The true inheritance was this letter. It was the truth. And it was everything. The news broke like a tsunami. The arrests of Marcus Thorne, Catherine Croft, and a dozen high-ranking executives at Croft Holdings sent shockwaves through the global financial community. The story of the massive internal fraud was on the front page of every major newspaper, from the Wall Street Journal to the Financial Times. But the media, ever hungry for a human angle, quickly seized upon the more sensational part of the story, the revelation that Sophia Rossi was an undercover operative and that the billionaire's bombshell will have been a brilliant piece of posthumous strategy. The narrative flipped overnight. Isabella Croft was no longer the jilted wife, the tragic victim. She was now the protected queen, the secret heiress to a fortune and a legacy that had been saved by her husband's incredible foresight. Isabella, shielded from the ensuing media storm by Benjamin Carter and a team of security and public relations experts he had on standby, felt like she was watching a movie of her own life. After the meeting in Carter's office, he had moved her and her mother into a secure luxury suite at the Four Seasons, a quiet sanctuary overlooking the city. The days were a whirlwind of activity. But for the first time since Margot's death, it was a whirlwind she could control. There were meetings with Carter to go over the vast and complex portfolio Margot had left her. There were consultations with the new interim board of Croft Holdings. A team of trusted loyalists Margot had hand-picked and vetted with Carter's help. They looked to her not with pity, but with a profound respect. She was not just the owner. She was the living embodiment of Margot's final mission. One afternoon, there was a visitor, Elena Vargas. The woman the world knew as Sophia Rossi. Without the glamorous makeup and the sultry persona, she looked different, smaller, more serious, but with the same intelligent, watchful eyes. She was dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a sweater, and her demeanor was professional and direct. "Mrs. Croft," she said with a nod, declining Isabella's offer of a seat. "I just came to offer my condolences personally. And my respect. Your husband was one of the bravest men I have ever known. He trusted you," Isabella said, her voice quiet. "He put his entire legacy, and my life, in your hands. It was an honor to serve him," Elena replied. "He spoke of you often. During the planning, when things were difficult, he would always say, 'I'm doing this for Izzy.' He wanted to give you a clean world to live in. I hope he succeeded." Isabella looked at the woman who had, in a way, been her rival, but who was in truth her protector. There was no animosity, no jealousy, only a strange, shared bond forged in the crucible of Margot's secret war. "Thank you," Isabella said. And she meant it. "For everything." Elena gave a small, rare smile. "The check I offered you at the estate. That was Margot's idea. A final piece of misdirection. He knew you'd refuse it. He said, 'My Izzy has too much pride to take money from the woman she thinks destroyed her life.' It was his way of proving to anyone who might have been watching that the animosity was real. The detail, so small, so perfectly Margot, made Isabella's heart ache with a fresh wave of love and loss. Even in his intricate planning, he had known her, truly known her. As the legal machinery turned, the public will was officially invalidated. The true will, in conjunction with the living trust, was executed. Isabella Maria Croft was now officially one of the wealthiest women in the world. But the money, the power, the endless string of zeros in her bank account, it all felt secondary. Her focus was singular. 2 months after that fateful meeting in Benjamin Carter's office, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Alexander, after his father. Holding her son in her arms in the quiet of the hospital room, looking into his tiny face, she felt a sense of peace she had thought was lost to her forever. This was her purpose. This was Margot's true legacy, not the steel and glass towers of his company, but this warm, breathing, perfect little boy. She did not retreat from the world. Instead, guided by Margot's letter, she stepped into her new role with a quiet grace and a steely determination that surprised everyone. She did not take the CEO position at Croft Holdings herself, but instead appointed a brilliant, innovative leader recommended by Carter, a woman who shared Margot's vision for sustainable energy and ethical business practices. Isabella took her seat as the chairwoman of the board, the guardian of the company's moral compass. She sold Disti, Bart's villa and the Park Avenue penthouse. They held too many ghosts. But she kept the Carmel estate. She returned not as a prisoner in a golden cage, but as its rightful mistress. She walked the halls, no longer haunted by memories of betrayal, but filled with a deeper understanding of the sacrifices that had been made within those walls. She stood on the cliff's edge, holding her son, and looked out at the ocean, no longer seeing it as a symbol of loss, but as a vast expanse of possibility. She poured millions into the Isabella Croft Foundation for the Arts, turning her small San Francisco gallery into a major institution that provided grants and platforms for emerging, underrepresented artists. She funded educational programs and built shelters for women and children fleeing abusive situations, turning her pain into a source of strength and support for others. She found Margot's book of Neruda sonnets and placed it on the bedside table in her room. Forever yours. The words no longer mocked her. They were a promise that had been kept in the most unexpected and extraordinary way. Years passed. The world Isabella built flourished. And at its center was Alexander. He grew into a young man with his father's sharp intellect and his mother's compassionate heart. On his 18th birthday, Isabella gave him the one thing she had held closest, his father's letter. They sat together on the terrace in Carmel, the scent of salt and roses a gentle comfort. Alexander read it, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock, to a deep, profound understanding. He did all that for us, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked up from the page. He made the world think he was a monster, just to keep you safe. Isabella smiled, tears welling in her eyes. He was the most complex man I ever knew. But his love was the simplest, truest thing in my life. The fortune he left us was never the money, Alex. It was the freedom to build a better world. That is his real legacy. And now, it's ours to continue. She looked at her son. A man now, ready to make his own mark. She saw Margot's strength in his eyes, but also a gentle wisdom that was all his own. Her life was not a fairy tale. It was a complex tapestry woven with threads of love, grief, betrayal, and redemption. She had been left with nothing, only to inherit everything. Not just the fortune, but the truth. And in the end, the truth was the only inheritance that truly mattered. Isabella's story is a powerful reminder that things are not always as they seem. It's a story about the hidden battles people fight, the incredible lengths we go to for the ones we love, and the enduring power of truth in a world full of deception. It shows us that even in our darkest moments, when we feel completely lost and abandoned, a single call, a single revelation, can change everything. If her story of resilience, love, and ultimate triumph moved you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with someone who loves a story of incredible twists and turns. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into the most dramatic real-life stories you can imagine. Thank you for watching.